So it's important to note that although law enforcement is full of pernicious, impertinent people, they are rather intrusive, really. There perhaps was one or two officers who were the voice of reason in the Santa Clara County Sheriff Department, although I wouldn't take any of their words for it personally. And I would like to remind you of this clip.
Did he say anything about I need to be in the psych ward or anything like that?
Did he say anything about what?
About me needing to be in the psych ward or anything like that?
Yes, he did.
Well, did he try to get you to help him get me to the psych ward?
Because he don't basically.
So he asked you to help piss me off so that I go to the psych ward?
Yeah.
So I did a 20-year study of myself, 70 years reviewing YouTube videos and looking at my behavior on camera and in retrospect. A lot of introspection. 4 years before that, talking to my ex-fiancée on camera for hours and hours every day on Yahoo. Listening to what she says, observing myself on camera to make sure that I didn't look bad while I'm talking to a female whose opinion I cared greatly about. I lived with my ex before that for months, So also it's important to note that my brothers and I rarely were in the same place for very long, especially after the controversial years of my life, 13 and up. We went to different schools, different boarding schools, and even when my younger brother and I went to the same boarding school in Southern California, we didn't really have a strong line of communication. My parents and I have never had a strong line of communication. So therefore, I had to consider that for the study. The testimony of my ex of over 14 years I have on record, where she says that there's nothing wrong with me. I'm one of the most normal people she knows. The testimony, so that takes us back to about 2001. The testimony of my ex-fiancée that during the time that we're talking, that takes us back to about 2005. The testimony of females who knew me for the last year, I have that on record. The testimony of female who knows me for over 2 years, I have that on record as well. All of these are favorable testimonies. The parents, in the 34 years I've been alive, my parents are the only ones to ever call the psych ward on me. The closest thing to an exception is being pissed drunk in public, and then the cops called my parents, and then they decided to take them to the psych ward after that. So the best friends who have known me for 20 plus years saying there's nothing wrong with me, perhaps the opposition view will get to them and they will change their story. Regardless, I have the people who know me the best for the last 15 years, agreeing with me on record. So all the people who have known me best for the last 20 plus years, and on top of that, they have no reason in the world to lie to me, would agree with me. If you cannot judge what is socially normative by people who are seen as normal in society, who know me best, then what in the hell can you judge it by? So you have D, he's known me for a long time, probably going back to him, I want to say when I was 16, something like that. He's considered normal by people who are poor, and also he has an uncanny ability to blend in with rich people and to be polite, and he's considered normal by them as well. AZ, who has a master in business, he's considered normal, especially in suburban white America and with rich people and what have you. Okay, so considering psychiatrist perspective and the few who have said there is nothing wrong with me, especially whom just happen to be the ones with no communication with my paranoid, one-sided, overbearing parents. Okay, so after I considered all these things, it brought me to very obvious conclusions, especially when I've coupled them with the studies I'm going to put in the description and the comments of this video. I talk about the Zimbardo study, Milgram, and the Rosenhan experiments, all those experiments. Conclusion. Only on drugs does my behavior ever become abnormal, especially when you consider the unique circumstances of my life. Biracial person living in the middle of nowhere, 2 doctors as parents, and so on. The covert drugging, which they have all but admitted has affected my behavior for at least 4 years. And then there's psychiatric drugs and smoking marijuana before that. Drinking alcohol. I no longer, ever since May 5th, 2009, I've quit alcohol, and I've quit marijuana for about 1.5 years now. In the morning, I do the best martial art combos because the drugs have the least effect on me. When I have days of avoiding drugging, for the most part, I have made the best combos because they're drugging my food. I think the most clearly off psych meds, and psychiatry is an utter fraud. Psychiatrists fail to stick up for the patient unless it is in a way that helps them look good, such as saying a serial killer is mentally ill and not responsible for their actions. Therefore, they're trying to make it seem like they stick up for their patients even when they're serial killers. Someone to talk to, good nutrition, exercise, not settling for a woman or a significant other and meeting your intimacy needs, and a powerful connection with God help the individual in any environment. While addressing the sociological causes as well as environmental factors is the best way to address the root cause of the majority of cases of perceived mood disorders and mental disorders, etc. Many of these disorders are caused by the contrast of one's living compared to people who seem to have it good in life, as we have seen with the social media studies that say that Facebook, MySpace, Instagram, etc. have depressed many people who think other people enjoy life much more. And in this capitalist system of drugged up social conformity, they are most likely right. Drugs and chemicals in the environment are the causes of most abnormal behavior, whether it is sugar, caffeine, prescription drugs, illicit street drugs, preservatives, fillers, etc. I urge you to watch this thing through. I have very good proofs coming up, including Stanford University's David Rosenhan and more. Thank you. In the past, I've shown you Dr. Thomas Szasz, who was a psychiatrist for 60 years, a retired professor or professor emeritus, honorably retired psychiatrist, who said psychiatry is a sick joke. Now I'm going to bring you to the Rosenhan study. David Rosenhan, Stanford University. I have referenced this study many times in my videos. But there's nothing like hearing it from the horse's mouth.
A different kind of criticism, but one that's just as provocative, has been leveled by David Rosenhan of Stanford University.
Between 1969 and 1972, a group of colleagues and I gained admission to psychiatric hospitals by faking a single symptom, which was that we said that we heard voices, and the voices said, empty, dull, thud. The moment we were admitted to the hospital, we abandoned our symptom, and we behaved the way we usually behave. The question was, would anyone detect that we were sane? The answer was, no. No one ever did. Admitted with the diagnosis in the main of paranoid schizophrenia, we were discharged with the diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia in remission. Now, in remission doesn't mean quite the same thing as sane. The term we use to describe the experience is dehumanized. Nobody talks to you. Nobody has any contact with you. The average contact of patients with staff was about 6.5 minutes a day. Nobody comes to visit. The first time I was in a psychiatric hospital, on an admissions ward with 41 men, my wife constituted 4 of the 7 visitors on a weekend. Psychiatric hospitals are storehouses for people in society whom you really don't want, whom you really don't understand, and for whom you've lost a great deal of sympathy. Staff need constantly to be reminded, and it's very hard to remind them. They are, after all, doing their best on the front end, but they need constantly to be reminded that the people who are their charges are not merely collections of symptoms. They are people with spouses, with children, with parents, with jobs, with mortgages and bills to pay, that they are, in the fullest sense of the word, very human and very unhappy.
Now, what happens when you couple that with this. Now, I've been saying these things for over 20 years, talking about the dangers of psychiatric medications and how the staff doesn't understand you, and basically what he said, you know, except for as a little, you know, as a teenager saying it in my own words. So what happens when you couple that with RT?
Antidepressants are killing people. A recent report claims the drug kills an estimated 500,000 Americans and Europeans annually. Efficiency trials funded by pharmacy companies are biased, it shows. The study also found psychiatric drugs actually cause 15 times more suicides than reported by the FDA, not to mention some of the side effects like mania, nervousness, and paranoia. The list just goes on. Nonetheless, antidepressants are the second biggest prescribed drug in the U.S., with more than 250 million prescriptions given out each year. Why is there so little attention to this when, well, money talks? The antidepressant market is huge. It was worth $9.4 billion in 2013. Joining us in the now is Peter Gorcha, researcher of this data and professor at Denmark's Nordic Cochrane Center. Your research claims 500,000 deaths are caused by antidepressants annually.
We have, you know, professors, Stanford University, you know, Denmark University. Okay? I mean, it is a no-brainer. And you have stupid community college cops, greedy control freak filth, teaming up with psychiatrist trash, killing 500,000 people a year in Western countries alone. Now, let's not forget that all of these people, you know, have been basically called out by Big Pharma. And they, you know, with the Rosenhan experiment, the institution said, you know what? Send in a bunch of people and we will catch every single last one of them. So they had a rate that was something like between 4 and 10 times. I forgot what it was, but it was a high rate of, you know, claiming that people were faking it. And it turns out they hadn't sent a single person in to fake it. Psychiatry is a complete fraud. On record, they don't know what they're talking about, but they're killing 500,000 people a year annually. Over 500,000. Over 500,000 people a year annually. So almost 2,000 people every single day in Western countries alone are dropping dead from psych meds. You couple that with the speech I just gave. I am the textbook political dissident who is targeted for psychiatric abuse by the Santa Clara County Sheriff Department and Valley Medical Center the most. But then there are government agencies, political groups at work here, at play here as well. Thank you. Now, I'm a man who knows the truth, and I'm only wrong about little insignificant details here and there, or perhaps I'll misspeak, especially due to their covert drugging or when they manage to put me on psych meds. In the last clip, I referenced the non-existent imposter experiment. I didn't know what it was called. I didn't know how many people. For this experiment, Rosenhall used a well-known approach in teaching hospital, whose staff had heard of the results of the initial study, but claimed that similar errors could not be made at their institution. Rosenhall arranged with them that during a 3-month period, 1 or more pseudo-patients would attempt to gain admission, and the staff would rate every incoming patient as to the likelihood they were an imposter. Out of 193 patients, 41 were considered to be imposters, and a further 42 considered suspect. In reality, Rosenhan had sent no pseudo-patients, and all patients suspected as imposters by the hospital staff were ordinary patients. This led to a conclusion that any diagnostic process that lends itself too readily to massive errors of this sort cannot be a very reliable one. There was also a significant reduction in the number of admissions to the hospital. That suggests that psychiatrists had been over-admitting before the non-experiment was conducted. Now, you will have complete morons say, well, This study took place in, what was it? I want to say the 70s. Let's see. Okay, he published in the Journal of Science in 1973. Okay, now you'll say, well, this took place in the 70s. It's irrelevant now. I'm going to give you a second to take that back if you're saying that right now. Think for a second. Has the diagnostic processes changed since then? No. We still judge people by, their behavior. There's no valid diagnostic test. It's still done the exact same way. In fact, it's even worse these days because you have the online tests. They'll give you a list of questions. You fill it out. They'll talk to you. They'll ask you basically the same thing that they gave you on the page of questions. And they might ask you to elaborate a little bit, and that's it. Boom, you have a diagnosis. Boom, it's done. So absolutely, this study is still extremely relevant. Extremely relevant. The Rosenhan study proves that psychiatry is a fraud. And the idea that we, that people, he even uses the term dehumanization. The idea that we force medicate people based on this obvious fraud. It's not even subtle. It's in your face, because a bunch of community college fucking pigs say so. Because a bunch of big pharmaceutical scum who are making billions of dollars say so. Because a bunch of corrupt politicians have allowed it to continue, is absolutely repugnant, reprehensible, and deplorable. Don't forget that all these people were forced to admit to having a mental illness and to agree to take antipsychotics as a condition of their release, which is the same way that I have been treated. I know this is still relevant because I myself have been to the psych ward many times because of my parents' allegations. Without a shred of evidence, the cops come here, believe them, take me. And one time the cops went as far as to say, I don't see any chicken wings on the floor. I don't see the lock being broken. And some of you said, well, maybe it's in your head. Maybe it's in your head. Maybe it's in my head. Really? You see what that is? That is a lock that has been broken and on my door for a very long time. Maybe it's a little dark. Let me get a flashlight real quick. That is a lock that's been broken for a very long time. These are locks that before that were broken as well. Those holes right there. Okay? The lock was broken. There was chicken wings and chicken sauce and a broken plate on the floor from me having been assaulted. The cops blatantly, in my face, said, I don't see a broken lock. I don't see chicken wings on the floor while they're standing on pieces of broken plate and chicken wing sauce. So it's not just that this is some kind of an accident or they're doing their best. They are playing stupid on purpose. Santa Clara County Mental Health Services, just like all other mental health services, are extremely guilty. I just happen to know this firsthand. Santa Clara County Sheriff's Department, firsthand. The internal affairs that's supposed to regulate them, I know firsthand because I filed complaints that they never even got back to me on. And they might, try to cover their asses and get back to me now, but guess what, buddies? It's too fucking late. You're guilty as sin. You go down in history as the filth you are. And this is what happens when you try to oppress someone who is more intelligent than you are. Take notes, you fucking pigs. So it's important to note that although law enforcement is full of pernicious, impertinent people, they are rather intrusive, really. There perhaps was one or two officers who were the voice of reason in the Santa Clara County Sheriff Department. Although I wouldn't take any of their words for it personally. And I would like to remind you of this clip.
Did he say anything about I need to be in the psych ward or anything like that?
Did he say anything about what?
About me needing to be in the psych ward or anything like that?
Listen to what she says, observing myself on camera to make sure that I didn't look bad while I'm talking to a female whose opinion I cared greatly about. I lived with my ex before that for months, you know. So, also it's important to note that my brothers and I rarely were in the same place for very long, especially after the controversial years of my life, 13 and up. We went to different schools, different boarding schools, and even when my younger brother and I went to the same boarding school in Southern California, we didn't really have a strong line of communication. My parents and I have never had a strong. Did he try to get you to help him get me to the psych ward? So he asked you to help piss me off so that I go to the psych ward? So I did a 20-year study of myself, 70 years reviewing YouTube videos and looking at my behavior on camera and in retrospect. A lot of introspection. 4 years before that, talking to my ex-fiance on camera for hours and hours every day on Yahoo. The parents, in the 34 years I've been alive, my parents are the only ones to ever call the psych ward on me. The closest thing to an exception is being pissed drunk in public, and then the cops called my parents, and then they decided to take me to the psych ward after that. So the best friends who have known me for 20 plus years saying there's nothing wrong with me. Perhaps the opposition view will get to them and they will change their story. Regardless, I have the people who know me the best for the last 15 years, agreeing with me on record. So all the people who have known me best for the last 20 years are online of communication. So therefore, I had to consider that for the study. The testimony of my ex of over 14 years I have on record, where she says that there's nothing wrong with me. I'm one of the most normal people she knows. The testimony, so that takes us back to about 2001. The testimony of my ex-fiance that during the time that we're talking, that takes us back to about 2005. The testimony of females who knew me for the last year, I have that on record. The testimony of female who knows me for over 2 years, I have that on record as well. All of these are favorable testimonies.